So now, very briefly, and then we're talking about Darwin, the events sort of leading up to his theory of natural selection. So he did a lot of things. We'll talk about them, and he figured out, how did species change and adapt? Okay, and this theory of natural selection, what is it? That's what this standard is about. So first of all, just a brief intro to Charles Darwin. He was an English naturalist. And he was very fortunate in 1831. He joined this voyage on a ship called the HMS Beagle. You should know that. And on this 5-year journey, 5 years is a long time, think about how much you have changed in 5 years. He collected and studied plant and animal specimens, like tons of them. Bones, fossils, all these things. He collected everything. Okay. And his most famous stop was the Galapagos Islands, which is the ground in which he sort of developed this theory. And this is how he looks like. The original slide I showed you, that's how he looked like sort of near the tail end of his life. But this is how he looked like after he returned from the voyage, this awesome man right here. Just so you get a pictorial view of what he actually did. So English naturalist, he started in Great Britain. And you could follow along this line of everywhere he went in 5 years. Crazy what he did. Those of you that need a visualization of where the Galapagos Islands are, they're right over here on the west coast or west of South America. So went a lot of places for 5 years on this HMS Beagle. Here's the Galapagos Islands. Here's two pictures of how they look like. Okay, and here are a more I guess in-depth look of what the islands look like. You'll notice that the Galapagos Islands is made up of many islands, but more important than that, they're made up of many islands of different sizes and also different types of ecosystems. So if you look at this green to light green legend, we've got a big island with lots of mountains, and we also have some with very little islands and also lots of low hills. So this is actually one of the perfect places to sort of understand why species evolved. So here are some of the animals that exist in the Galapagos Islands. We'll talk about these later. They're cute, they're awesome. The great thing about this, and the reason why it worked, why his theories worked on these islands, is because there was an incredible amount of diversity in terms of animals. Okay, if he went to a different place like the desert, it wouldn't work because there was like so few diverse animals and species. But this one, there are hundreds and thousands, literally, of species of plants and animals that he got to study just in a small area. One of the ones that he collected, or one of the very first things that he noticed, were something called finches. You may have studied Darwin's finches before. They're these birds. And he noticed, like, just amongst these islands, again, that's a great ground because I have different ecosystems all in a small area. Remember, he doesn't have the internet. He can't Google things. He can't email. He can't text other people on other islands. He actually had to go to different islands. These birds, almost the exact same species, but they're different very, 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 I guess, very slightly. These are all finches. These are all sort of the same bird. But one thing that was different among them is these beaks. Notice this beak right here. Compare it with this beak right here. Compared to this beak right here. This is almost the exact same bird. Obviously, they're different colors, but he's like, why are their beaks so different? And he noticed that even though they're about all the same size and their beaks are different, and we'll talk about this later, they noticed that it also correlated to what their food was. So this one eats cactus and its beak is like this. This one eats insects and its beak is like that. And this one eats seeds and its beak is like that. All birds are the same size but different beaks. And it's like, oh, pretty interesting. The vice governor of the Galapagos Islands told Darwin he could tell which island a particular tortoise came from by looking at its shell. So this critical information was like also very interesting to him because it's sort of like, motivated him to understand, why. You have this giant tortoise and somebody on the islands can say like, oh, that tortoise, oh, that must be from that island. He's like, huh, why? Even though like he sort of got the point about this when he went to the Galapagos, he waited 30 years before he even published or even wrote a book about it. And it's actually a funny story. Alfred Russel Wallace, he published a paper on evolution in 1858, and that's the only reason why Darwin published his. So thinking about this, you have this great idea, like you want to do something really cool, and then all of a sudden this other guy did it. He's like, oh, never mind, I'm gonna do it. So just like you, like maybe you're lazy or you want to procrastinate, and then somebody else does it and looks, and you don't want to be showed up. So he made his own, 1859, very famous writing, a very famous paper that you need to know on the origin of species by means of natural selection. So on the origin of species, meaning like, the beginning of species, and then his introduction for something called natural selection. His term was evolution must have come from natural selection, meaning nature selects it. In his book, he did not say evolution. Like, evolution is sort of a term that we coined. Instead, again, he used descent with modification, meaning we descended from the same ancestors, but modified every single generation. So here's a picture of the paper, picture of the work inside. Again, on the origin of species is something that you need to know, the title of at least. You don't need to read the book. So adaptations, definition of adaptations is enhancing an organism's ability to survive and reproduce. So something that changes in a species that allows you to be fit, quote unquote fit. Fit not meaning six-pack, but fit meaning you could last longer in your environment. So like for humans, people say like our brain is our greatest adaptation. In this particular example, the desert fox, it has large ears, okay? The reason why it has large ears and the Arctic fox has small ears. So both foxes, you know, in real life, you could see these foxes. The Arctic fox actually have at the aquarium in the Pacific. But you may notice, even though they have the same body type, how one has large ears and one has small ears. And you may or may not know this, but large ears for desert foxes, can you guess what you know about their ecosystem? Yeah, it's really hot. And you notice if you have large ears, it sort of dissipates the heat if you're in a hot environment. So it sort of cools you down a little bit. It spreads the heat out. You may know another animal that has very, very large ears, the elephant. The elephant uses these giant ears because it gets so hot, the ears sort of spread the heat out for it. And then there's also the Arctic fox, which has small ears. It doesn't want to dissipate the heat. In this cold environment, it wants to retain heat. So the closer and the closer these body parts are to the body, the better it is to like stay warm. And then overproduction of offspring. Remember we talked about Malthus's theory in the last video. If we overproduce offspring, or we make more than our, if we make more organisms in our species than we need, it leads to competition for resources, which drives why we would have to change. Okay, so here are some examples of like evolutionary adaptations that the organisms made so they could survive and be fit. So some of you are saying, what's the difference between natural selection and artificial selection? Natural selection, you know, by the word, the actual word means natural. Nature selects, or nature decides. Artificial selection, you see the difference between these two, is man decides. Not necessarily man, but we do it. So nature decides, meaning I'm gonna have an adaptation because they do it. Artificial selection is sort of like, what if a farmer says, I only want black cows. So every time it sees a white cow, it kills it. And then, you know, if only black cows exist, then their offspring will only be black. That's artificial selection. Like, we did it. Nature, okay, technically we're nature, but a man or some greater being besides nature did it. Natural selection works on an individual. Artificial selection is like selective breeding or inbreeding. It doesn't have to be as cruel as my black cow. Like, maybe there's a chicken that has golden eggs, just for example. Like, what if I selectively make sure that this golden egg, you know, hen is the only one that sort of breeds, so that every single future hen now has golden eggs or whatever. That's selective breeding. And then when we're talking about natural selection, we're talking about individual pieces that make them survive. So like the way we talked about the finches, like beaks. But artificial selection is sort of like a bigger one, so like Dalmatians, or I said cows, or chickens and hens, stuff like that. So if humans can create substantial change over a short time, nature can over a long time. So that's the main point, the difference between them. Artificial selection is a very short time. Natural selection, if I really, really, really want to make a big change, like I want humans to have 3 eyes, it's going to take a very, very, very long time. Okay. So the last slide, the last part of the video for today, the theory of natural selection. 4 main tenets. 1, populations produce more offspring than can possibly survive. This is necessary because if we don't produce more than we need, then there's no competition, which means nobody like creates adaptations or nobody mutates. 2, individuals in a population vary extensively from each other, mostly due to inheritance. So even though we're in the same population, we sort of vary depending on our parents. So even though we're all humans, we all look very different. We vary extensively based on our inheritance or our parents. 3, struggle to survive. Individuals whose inherited characteristics best fit to the environment leave more offspring that's less fit. So if we talk about you know, these desert foxes that have bigger ears, they survive more, so then they technically have more babies than desert foxes with smaller ears. So after millions, thousands of years, all foxes have large ears. It takes a long time. And lastly, unequal ability of individuals to survive and reproduce leads to gradual change, with favorable characteristics accumulating over generations. So we need unequal ability so that the population sort of changes to these favorable characteristics. So that's the theory of natural selection. It's kind of dense. I think if I explain it to you, you understand. It's gonna be hard to memorize, but you need to like sort of know this like very well. So that's the last video for today. For the rest of the class, you know, for some reason I only got two lesson plans. So make sure that today, same thing, I sort of need an update on your lesson plan. I need to see where you're at today. I only got Adon's group and Megan's group, so I'm missing a lot of you. And then today and over through the weekend, what I want you to do, you're gonna make study blue cards. I'll post a list later. And you also need to highlight and read chapter 22 in Boundless, okay? So if I don't see you, which I probably won't, have an awesome weekend. Much love, much prayers to you and your families. And I'll see you guys on Monday. Can't wait to see you. All right, take care.